Hello, happy Thursday. This is another episode of our GCS Inclusion series. And today we're going to be talking to a gentleman that is no stranger to public speaking. Gentleman is called David Weston, and he's the founder and chief executive of the Teacher Development Trust. David, hello.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you so much, Aaron.
David, it's a real pleasure. So thank you so much. David, we got talking on LinkedIn, and I was really interested about the journey of what you've been doing, both in your personal life, but also in your professional circumstances, because it's carved out your career in a direction that maybe even you didn't think it was going to go down. So could you just give us a little bit of an intro about you, and then we'll get into the detail?
Yeah, certainly. And again, lovely to be here. And thinking about inclusion, I suppose, has really developed over my career so far. I started off really with not much idea of what I wanted to do in my life, going to university. I ended up actually staying in university because I had fallen into the ballroom dancing club, which I was really enjoying, and didn't wanted to stay there for another year, frankly. So I ended up doing a postgrad teaching. And then eventually thought I really probably need to get a job. So I ended up in teaching, which is one of the least inspiring stories I've ever heard about how people got into teaching. But I was in teaching, and what was interesting for me was starting training in 2002-03, which was a time where here in the UK, the Section 28 law was still in force, and people aren't familiar with that. That was essentially a government law that was saying that no teacher is allowed to promote homosexuality in schools, and widely understood that essentially that means, don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about it. Now, to be fair, at that time, it wasn't really enforced, but it was still on the statute books.
What year was this that you, sorry, what year was this that you actually got into teaching, that this law was still there?
So 2002-03, it was actually, I think it was the last year of the law, because Prime Minister Blair had been under a lot of pressure to get rid of it. But I ended up going into teaching, but essentially saying, well, I've kind of got to be closeted because people were, right? And any teachers I knew at that stage wouldn't have suddenly been coming out in grand gestures because it was still illegal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I ended up in teaching, and I went through my sort of a 10-year teaching career, which was pretty challenging. I wasn't always the best teacher during that time. I was part-time for some of the time. I was ill for quite a lot of the time. I didn't know, but I had a really serious liver condition.
Oh, wow.
Which ended up with me getting a liver transplant and being off work for quite a few months. And I had a bit of an epiphany, to be honest, at one of those stages where I was thinking, I was in hospital. I ended up watching the film Milk, and Harvey Milk, a politician from San Francisco, is one of the first openly gay politicians. And the impact he had by just saying, I am me, I'm gay, was enormous. And thinking to myself, right, now is time where I have to make a difference, right? Second chance of life if you have an organ transplant. And so came back into teaching, decided this is the time I'm now going to be open about my sexuality, which we can talk more about later if you like. But
yeah,
I essentially, it was just the start of something big and being much more open. And the domino effect of me telling my story on how that impacted on other people is something that just continues to delight and make me very happy. And then I ended up also moving sort of adjacent to teaching rather than actually being a teacher myself. I founded a charity to support teachers, which is something I've been doing for the last 10 years. So yeah, it's meandered around, and there's been lots of both personal and professional factors that have been a result of that.
So I'm going to poke the bear a little bit here, if you don't mind. So as a homosexual gentleman and going into teaching, how did that affect you and your well-being, going into a career where you're surrounded and it's about educating individuals, creating some element of influence over the directions, and also creating safe spaces? Schools should be safe spaces. How did that make you feel?
Well, so it was very interesting because I think actually when I started teaching, I don't think I'd fully come to grips with my own sexuality. So I definitely wasn't ready to talk to anybody else about it. There was a strong sense that because I didn't want to talk to anybody else about it, I'd rather just deflect attention. As a young and very young looking teacher, I'm sure when I was about 22, 23 starting teaching, I looked about 15. So of course, working in secondary, the teenagers were, fairly merciless in sort of asking, oh, have you got a girlfriend? So you've got this, like, and those sorts of questions, which I would just look, I would go very red and I would ignore, and sort of having trouble, as I already did, in terms of having any sort of really strong classroom presence and really, lots of authority. I think they could tell that was something I was very uncomfortable asking. So I think, and that made me more uncomfortable, and think even when you start talking about it, it's really awful. Oh my goodness, I can't. But you also were aware that, these are teenagers at the point where they are figuring out their identity, their sexuality, everything. And the sex education in schools has for a long time been pretty poor. It's not actually helping them understand sex and relationships and how to navigate these things, which leaves so many children at the risk of damage, misunderstanding, being abused, all sorts of things. So I sort of knew I wasn't ready to talk about it, didn't know how I would talk about it, was too frightened to say anything, didn't know how to answer their questions. And it was just pretty awkward, really. So I was trying to say, just focus on the physics, focus on the maths, which were my subjects.
Yeah. And, I remember in my teenage years, I didn't understand what sexuality was. I didn't even know what heterosexual meant or homosexuality meant or anything like that. But I suppose as well, from you having or being at the coalface, being in the education sector, you're faced with those that like to be the classroom clown, that's out there asking you these sorts of questions and almost making you feel uncomfortable. But on the other flip side, you've also got individuals that know who they are and they understand about sexuality that also need help. Did you come across anybody that sort of like stood out to you in your career as a teacher that helped to influence the career that you moved into?
So, yes, eventually. Early on, in those early years before I decided to come out as a teacher, I think, all children are who are questioning their sexuality, their gender, anything, they are so anxious about being seen to say the wrong thing or asking or being made a fool of, that actually, unless you are a very obvious invisible person, they're not going to come and talk to you. So no one came and talked to me before I came out. After I came out, yes, I certainly got people coming to talk to me. In some cases, I remember receiving this anonymous letter, which I still have, I hold rather dear, of apparently someone who was fairly young, but had said, it made so much difference to me. Thank you so much. And, that was lovely. A couple of things that people said. There was an opportunity in a lesson once where we were just teaching a physics lesson, and I just got engaged actually to my now ex-husband, but I was fiddling around with the engagement ring. I accidentally dropped it. There was a really interesting opportunity where someone just said, oh, she'll be really annoyed if you lose it. And I said, yeah, he will, but yes. And then there was a little moment where they just said, oh, can men get married? And I was like, yes, they can. And they said, oh, but you don't seem like George, sir. And there was a pupil in the class who was fairly camp. He was fairly, I think he was fairly open about his sexuality already.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting in as much as they had to go, oh, so that is different from that, and how do I understand that? And it was a really good educational moment where I could actually say, wow, folks, you can't pigeonhole people. And actually, depending on how someone acts, it doesn't make any difference. And you're saying, they actually said, they used the word camp, which is why I did. And it was like, well, okay, so we need to have a conversation about what that really means and what do we actually mean about acting in a more masculine and feminine way and so on. It's actually only probably a 2 or 3 minute conversation. And we went on to something else. But it's those little moments that make a difference when you are in a position of authority and you can act as a role model and you can talk to people about certain things and you can understand the topic and you can reflect on it. So yes, that really did happen. What I didn't realize is that there were still more people that I didn't know. And it was actually a few years later, someone messaged me on LinkedIn and said, you might not realize this. I'm a heterosexual pupil, but I remember you coming out and I just seen you on LinkedIn. And I just wanted to tell you, actually, you had a massive impact and you maybe don't know how much you did.
Wow.
And amazing story. I kind of clipped a little bit of it with this person's permission and put it on Twitter and said, oh my goodness, look how much impact you can have as a teacher. It just went viral and loads of people just loved the story. Not because it was like, wow, look at what you've done, David, but it's great the impact that teachers can have. And isn't it lovely when people acknowledge that and look at the impact that being open can have? So yeah, some impact I knew at the time, some impact not till later, I think.
Yeah, and I think it was that Twitter, that tweet that you did that actually inspired me to reach out to you as well. I think it was around that sort of time that we got connected. It's interesting. I recently rewatched the Channel 4 program Queer as Folk, and that's set in a very similar sort of like time zone in what you're talking about. And it was very interesting to watch. And obviously, I can't base it on facts or anything like that, but from what you're saying, the teacher couldn't or wouldn't address the situation of the bullying towards the homosexual individual. Yet when the homosexual individual was then pushing back and causing an element of disruption in the class, they were the ones that were being penalized. And it just reminded me so much about education sector and the importance of being able to talk about it. So let's move on to you, because you moved away from teaching and you've created the and you're now educating teachers. Is that correct? Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, that's right. So I once I actually started feeling better, I'd had my liver transplant. I was kind of reaching out in all sorts of directions. I was going for all sorts of promotions and jobs and opportunities, because I suddenly went, wow, I've got my energy back. I'm looking forward to life. And as it happened, one of the things I ended up doing was some work to create a bit of a tool that would help teachers kind of reflect on their assessment data and then reflect on how they could train as a result. And that led me down this fantastic research rabbit hole, meeting loads of incredible researchers who essentially said, this is what we know about how you support teachers in the workplace to grow and develop and improve. And I read it and it made my heart sing and also beat my fist with frustration, thinking, yes, that is exactly what I have wanted in 10 years of teaching. And oh my goodness, if we've known this for so long, why isn't it there? A whole load of really chance conversations and things ended up with myself and some other school leaders essentially setting up this charity called the Teacher Development Trust. And it's a non-profit, it's a charity. The idea initially was to say, someone needs to say this is very important, because the government at the time was sort of dissolving away all of these governmental bodies that were focused on developing teachers. So we wanted to campaign for it. We wanted to help schools do it better. We wanted to help teachers actually experience this better. So set up very inexperienced. I hadn't led anything before, but I set up this charity just over 10 years ago now. And the journey through that has been starting by, I love talking. I don't know if that's obvious, but I love talking about problems and issues. And so I started by talking about it, and then school said, that's great. Can you help us, please? So then we set up services to help people. And then government said, that's quite interesting. We're thinking about policy. Can you help us talk about that? And then researchers said, that's interesting. We have this research. Could you help share it? So all of those areas we ended up doing. We ended up doing more work on school leadership, because actually, you can't just put training in a little box. You can only train and develop as an individual if you feel, psychologically safe, and you have trust, and you collaborate with your colleagues, and you have a great line manager, and your job role is clear, and you have organizational alignment, and all of those sorts of things, plus more. So actually, we ended up doing more and more work to help train school leaders, until a couple of years ago, we actually excitingly got the opportunity to be what's called a lead provider of the government qualifications for head teachers and senior school leaders and school subject leaders and year leaders and all that sort of thing. So we now, as well as delivering all of that other campaigning work and school support work, we also train thousands of school leaders every year. And it's just a massive privilege. I spend so much time working with school leaders and teachers, helping them with their leadership skills. And interestingly, we managed to talk about inclusion as well, of course, as one of the things that they need to do. So it's been a joy. It's been very hard work, but it has been a joy building this organization up, learning myself how to be a CEO, and the difference with being a CEO of a tiny little organization with a few people versus now an organization with nearly 30 people. So that's been quite the journey in itself as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And we've got a question of us, could we give some tips you would have for school leaders to build inclusion, from Betty?
Yes. I actually think this is not just school leaders, actually.
Agreed.
We can say some school leader bits. So how do you build an inclusive environment? There's the really superficial bit. The really superficial bit is having people who are diverse. And it's actually important, but I'm going to say it's superficial because you often get a conference lineup and you can see that they've just chosen all their favorite people who all end up being white and all end up being straight or whatever. And then they say, oh, we need some diversity. Let's pick a black man and let's pick a lesbian woman. But then they ask the black man and the lesbian woman to stand on stage and talk about black man and lesbian woman issues. So everyone then learns, oh, minorities are fine as long as they only champion their minority. And that's an issue. So what we actually need is lots of diversity, but we shouldn't then only ask people from diverse backgrounds to be champions of those things. Invite by all means, because people might be passionate, but actually also it's great for a school to hire a black male teacher and not say, hey, can you lead the Black Lives Matters work, but open that up to somebody else. Maybe that person can happily infuse as a white woman runs the Black Lives Matters work. That's important. It's also really important that somebody stands on stage and says, I'm not from any of these characteristics, but I passionately believe this is important. I've listened to lots of voices, but I'm going to be the person who champions these things. Because there is a danger. There's a danger of tokenism. And you can see this in influential organizations when somebody says, look, it's all about, why don't you have the black man? Why don't you have the gay man? Why don't you have the trans person? And then someone who's frankly uncomfortable with this cherry picks a member of one of those minorities who happens to say, actually, everything is fine. No one needs to do any more work in this area. And of course, like every member of a minority is allowed to have completely different views. But when they cherry pick one person and then say, see, you wanted someone of this characteristic, and now they're there and they're telling us there's no problem, so we're ignoring your issues. That is a problem. Agreed. And it's actually a problem of our own making, because if we say the key here is to have someone of that characteristic in your organization, on your leadership team, then we're opening ourselves up to that. Whereas if we say it's about championing those issues and trying to remove barriers, then actually we avoid that issue. So I would say that to schools. We can talk about curriculum as well, but I mean, that's a whole other interesting thing.
Absolutely. And it's something that I raise in all of these discussions, is that I strongly believe that we are conditioning people to fall into different careers. Obviously, I'm a recruiter. I work in the tech space, and one of the massive things I really want to try and play my part in is to get much more inclusion across the employment sectors, but typically in tech. There's a massive shortfall of women, outwardly gay individuals. Not that anybody should have to pronounce who they are. I'm anti that, because a private life is a private life. But what more can sort of the educational sector, and what parts do you help teachers understand about the fact that when you condition individuals, or you don't necessarily talk openly about minority groups, what do you think that does in the sense of the pipeline into careers or different industries in the future? Do you have a thought process on that?
Yeah, I do think that is an issue. I'm going to draw my little curtain here because my one side of my
face is
disappearing. So yeah, if we don't take these things seriously, then we have an issue. So exactly as you said, I think it's a very important point. I don't think anyone a woman who is a lesbian in a lesbian relationship, she shouldn't feel she has to tell everybody she is a lesbian.
No.
At the same time, there will be people who, by the way that they live and by the way that they express themselves and so on, more people are going to guess or assume. And so not everybody actually has that option. Not everybody has the option of deciding exactly who they're going to be and how they're going to present themselves. So I would say for everyone, if you have a power and you are able to just role model being yourself, and that includes someone who is a cis heterosexual white man, if you have that power and you can say, yeah, but actually, are we forgetting about women here? How would a trans person feel here? I wonder if there's something where actually we're not doing this right. Asking those questions is key. If someone invites you to something where there's just no sense of diversity represented, can you say the question, I'm not comfortable being just another white face in this? Those are the sorts of powerful things we can do, I think.
No, I like that. And we've got about 30 seconds left of our broadcast here. But if you could roll back the years and go back to younger David, that's just about to become teacher, is there any advice that you'd give to yourself?
Yes. It's going to be fine. It gets better. Be yourself, be open, talk about things. And it's actually wonderful once the confidence you have goes into other people and you see them benefiting and growing from it.
I think that actually, I'm going to make a point on that just for about 10 seconds, is that I think that outwardly confident individuals, regardless of your race, creed, sexuality, have a better chance of getting their message across than somebody that is insecure about their own well-being as well, and their own place in the world. Because I've seen firsthand of individuals that are massively confident and they are from a minority group, but they've succeeded because of their confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. David, is there anything else that you would like to add as your passing statement to us and our audience with regards to what more that people can do?
Read about it, read stories, ask questions, try and learn things that are outside your comfort zone. And if anyone is interested in teacher development, then come and find me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'd love to have more of a chat about that as well.
David, that's great. Thank you so much for your tips, your advice. There's some really good points in there. It's been a real pleasure talking with you today. So thank you for joining us.